Hello. What do we think about when we're thinking about understanding our lives? Our idea of the good life may include psychology, philosophical views, religion. We may go to literature, in particular poetry. We certainly demand hard information these days about our health and our physical selves. Well, I'm joined today by four people whose thinking sprawls across all or some of these boundaries for what I suppose universities might call a multidisciplinary natter. Julian Baggini is a philosopher who writes jointly with a therapist. Helen Dunmore is a wonderfully successful poet and novelist. Frances Ashcroft's an award-winning scientist for her work on diabetes, who writes about the body as an electrical machine in a book with plenty of poetic asides. And we're going to begin with the psychoanalyst Adam Phillips, whose new book, In Praise of the Unlived Life, is crammed with Shakespeare and Larkin and Graham Greene alongside Freud. Adam, let's start with the opening proposition, I suppose, of this book, which is the observation that most of us spend a huge amount of our lived lives thinking about lives that we're not living.
Well, I think it's partly inevitable because we have to think about what it is we want and what it is we need in order to survive. And what we need and want are, by definition, things we don't have. So I think that's one side of the equation, which is to do with straightforwardly staying alive. The other side of the equation, I think, is that we now know more about more people's lives than ever before. So we're more aware of how much we may not be having or actually be able to experience.
And so this might be everything from, as it were, the kind of glossy weekend magazines where we're reading about apparently terribly successful people who have wonderful family lives or wonderful careers or wonderful homes or wonderful houses, and we're thinking, that's where I'm going to be or going to go. But we're also thinking about, if I'd taken a different path at, I don't know, college or university, or I could be doing this, perhaps I should be doing this. And your point is that this is actually a very valuable way of living.
I think
it's not wasted time.
Yes, we can't help but do it, but it could be wasted time insofar as it becomes a sort of bolt hole or a way of escaping from engaging with our so-called real lives. I mean, if, for example, every time I feel slightly bored or restless, I eat chocolate, I'm really not going to discover what it is I might be wanting. So the book is suggesting something about how we need to be able to think about frustration. And clearly the culture is all the time persuading us that the moment we want something, we know what it is and we can have it. Whereas it may actually be very, very difficult to know what it is one wants.
So this is an anti-instant gratification book, which is suggesting that instead of instant gratification, we need thinking and instead of instant gratification, we need thinking, and you use a huge amount of literature. I mean, a massive amount of Shakespeare and, as I say, Larkin and Graham Greene and all sorts of people as a way of thinking about this. Shakespeare in particular, why?
Well, I think only for the obvious reason, which is Shakespeare has written so many things as well or better than we could imagine writing them. But I think that, I think in a way we might need to start at the beginning, which is I think frustration, for example, could be taught in schools. By the time we become grown adults, we can read all sorts of literature. And literature is inevitably about what it is we want and what's absent and what we might want in terms of cultural ideals. But I think there's a whole spectrum from, as it were, a child crying to reading Shakespeare that is along one line to do with finding languages for what matters most to us and what it is we actually want and need.
And this can be and should be hard work in terms of spending time. I mean, as a therapist, you spend a lot of time with people, listening to them talk.
Yes, it certainly is in a sense, but it doesn't only have to be hard work. I mean, there could be a real pleasure, and I think this may be something to do with education, pleasure in conversations about frustration, so that actually finding out what we want could also feel something worth doing, rather than only hard work.
Pleasure is a word that appears a lot in this book, and you make the point, which I think sets it in an interesting context, of there being a fundamental shift from the sort of scientific view of the world shaped by Darwin to the view of the world shaped by Freud. And that's the move from competition and survival to pleasure. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Well, Darwin talks about how, if you like, the first project is survival, and if survival is good enough, then there's reproduction. So in a way, Darwin is saying to us one way or another, everything we can use, we use for adaptation, for the possibility of reproduction. What Freud adds to this story, and Freud is himself a Darwinian, but what Freud adds to this is the question of pleasure, which is not simply what do I need to survive, but what pleasures do I need to make me feel that my life is worth living. So that for Freud, pleasure is very important. Survival in a way